I plan to keep these Valorant agents kind of on the back burner for a while because I really wanted to finish these Apex Legends figures by the end of the year, but after overwhelming fan demand and the fact that it's been over 3 months since the last one, it felt like the right time to do Omen. First thing I did was decide on these accessories. I included that Reaper, ghosty, cloudy leg piece thing because in the reference pose, he has a bunch of smoke and stuff emanating from and kind of replacing his legs, so I figured I should at least consider that as an option. Choosing the color for these accessories was pretty difficult because his in-game model is kind of more of a blue color, but I ultimately decided on this medium lilac color because I thought it looked really good on these two mocks in particular. His face print was the single easiest face print I have ever done. The colors were really easy to choose and the design was super simple and easy to replicate, so it was done in like 8 minutes or something. I posed the figure next. Here's a before and after. His torso print, as usual, wasn't super hard, but it was time consuming. I knew the scarf detailing at the top would be covered by a physical cape in the render, but I wasn't sure to what extent, so I still detailed it fully for the sake of having a pretty UV file afterwards. Spacing was a little tricky because there's so many different angles and stuff on his stomach. I needed to make a few judgment calls on what should have a gap and what should be a solid line. It took maybe 90 minutes and I'm happy enough with the result. I'll also say it definitely would have been much harder without my expanded color palette just for all those greys. His waist print was pretty tricky because I didn't want the belt detail to extend too much into his leg prints, so there's a good bit of compressing needed for the width of the belt. Other than that, it was fine. His left leg print was interesting in that I took some creative liberties with the design to a degree I've never done before. Firstly, I noticed that he has this black gap in his pants either side of his crotch, and for this figure I really adhered to the idea that the dividing piece between his legs is his crotch, so I lengthened this detail a lot and moved it pretty far out of place just to accommodate it. I also intentionally left out some details on the lower half of his legs, specifically the number of those straps around his boots. Simply put, there was way too many of them to compress into this tiny area, especially with the lines in between them and everything, so instead of 4 horizontal bands of them, I only included 3, which I think looked much better on the finished figure even if it's not as accurate. His right leg was even more challenging and just strange to translate. If you look at the reference art, he doesn't actually have the lower half of his leg, it just turns into smoke. So I was tempted to just erase it and include the smoke instead, but I've never seen a minifigure come with only half a leg, like it wouldn't even be able to stand up. And if you look at the reference again, even though there's no leg there, you can still pretty easily make out the shape of his leg just within the empty space of the smoke. So what I decided to do when it got to the bottom half was actually just print that smoke detail onto a clear, transparent bottom half of his dual molded legs. In the process, I also intentionally left huge chunks of the UV file empty so that you can see the transparent plastic underneath, which felt like the right approach to replicating this particular thing. I also extended this smoke print with some inside leg printing because that area is prominently on display, before shifting that belt print down a bit so that it's actually visible on the posed figure. His arm print was another area where I took some creative liberties in that I really wanted to emphasize those glowing blue gaps in between his bandages because I thought it would look infinitely better than leaving them small and hidden amidst the grey. I thought those specks of blue would look really nicely balanced alongside his blue face and chest details, so I scaled them up pretty dramatically from the reference. The rest of his arm was just bandaging for the most part, which I always enjoy drawing for some reason. The next stage was rendering the figure, and it was as I was rendering him that I realized I didn't really like his pose, but I didn't know why I didn't like it, so I just kept going in, changing his arm position, re-rendering, and so on, before rendering a blank version without his hood and another one where I tilt the hood a lot so that it covers his forehead and disappears into his chest, just like the reference. I then did the Photoshop adjustments where my first priority was sorting out his shoulder cape. This is pretty tricky because I needed to blend 2 different shadows together to look natural, all the while filling out the texture to finish the shape. I'm not 100% happy with how this looked, but I think it was good enough. I then decided to do a little special effects and add a subtle blue glow to these areas on his face, torso, and arm. It's definitely an embellishment, but I really like how it looked, especially on the face, because I felt the print was too hidden in the hood's shadow otherwise. I then added that smoke stuff from the reference image. As expected, I had to change the scale pretty dramatically to wrap around the minifigure shape, which wasn't a big deal, but I did make an executive decision to not bother with the smoke coming out of his face or extending his shoulder cape to flare upwards like in the image. My logic was that I made that cape a physical part of his outfit, and extending it to be that long and flaring upward would require the cape to be a rubber material in real life, which wouldn't match the cloth texture I had. And if I just said fuck it and left it as cloth, then it would look unnatural and distracting, and I just wanted to leave it as it was. And as for the smoke coming from his face, I also thought that it was just distracting, and I didn't like that it introduced this diagonal element to the top right corner of the figure. I also thought that without the cape flaring out to the left, that it felt too imbalanced to include. I then removed the scope from his gun, and with that, there you go, the finished figure. This one felt pretty fun. I ventured outside of my comfort zone and usual process to take some creative liberties in places, which kind of made it feel like I had more of a creative input, so I was a bit more proud of the outcome as a result. And now we spin to see who's next. Of everyone in the game, I'm kind of feeling Chamber or Phoenix next, and I'm not really vibing with Neon, but let's see. Killjoy, okay. Yeah, Killjoy could be fun.